And shares in Dubai gaining today after Brent crude oil surged 7% in a single trading day last Friday. Checking on the leaderboard at the Irish Open, Royal Portrush, Jamie Donaldson at the top, 14 under at this present time. And Australia set England a target of 252 in the second one-day international match. Delayed, wet outfield, but they should be on fairly soon, we are told. Now, coming up, we are going to be talking to the author of a new book titled The Rise of a New Order. He is Carlos Machado, head of Banco de Brazil here in the UAE. It's all about the rise of the emerging markets and what happens to Europe. We'll be talking to Carlos in just a couple of moments' time. First of all, though, very briefly, going to get the thoughts of Nick Stadmiller of Emirates NBD talking on Business Breakfast this morning, just to set the scene, talking about the EU meeting late last week that got the market so excited on Friday. Nick Stadmiller told the guys on Business Breakfast that we shouldn't get too over-exuberant.
Well, this is almost the 20th so-called make-or-break summit among the European leaders since the debt crisis began with Greece just over 2 years ago. And as far as the European make-or-break summits go, I would say that this one was a moderate success. Of course, that is a very low bar by which to judge these summits. I'm not terribly enthusiastic. The headlines do look good. There was some progress made, specifically on breaking the link between the banks and the sovereigns. Of course, the problem we had in Ireland and the problem that seems to be developing in Spain is that because the banking sector is having problems and money is going into the banking sector, that's increasing the debt burden of the sovereign because those countries are backstopping their bank sectors. So specifically what they've agreed to do is to take the bailout funds from the ESM, the permanent bailout mechanism, and to put that money directly into the Spanish banks, bypassing the Spanish sovereign. Now what that means is that the estimated debt load that Spain will have to bear could be reduced by as much as 10% of GDP. Very simply, because the Spanish government will not be responsible for the European bailout funds to the banks, it makes the Spanish government's debt dynamics look better because they're not responsible for that money.
Nick Stadmiller there of Emirates NBD.
Insight, an in-depth look at the issues shaping our world.
So let's look in more detail at this issue. It is a pleasure to be joined in the studio by Carlos Machado. He's the head of Banco de Brazil here in the UAE. He's also an author, and last week he unveiled his latest book, The Rise of a New Order. Carlos, it's great to see you. Thanks very much indeed for joining us.
My pleasure.
The book, you describe it as talking of the speculative model of growth that took part until the 2008 crises, giving way to priorities meant to revive the UAE status as the dominant trading hub between the West and the Middle East. More broadly speaking, set the scene about your new book, The Rise of a New Order. What do you mean by that?
When I say the rise of a new order, I'd like to point, not a forecast, but a panel about the last 6 centuries of history that this model is based on. If you could say that the era that we are living, we could call it modern era. In the modern era, this order was based on an economical system, a political system, and in an improvement of the capability that the men move around, and the contents move around. When I say contents, is trade, is goods, and people, work, and capital. But this model changed several times. If you consider that the Industrial Revolution was the inflection point that consolidated the hegemonic model and spread this model around, you'd say that the 70s and the 20th century, the last quarter of the 20th century, this era was formed, was based. And what it is, if you could define this model, if you could find this economic and financial model, you could say that is the informational global model. And after the 70s, especially when Richard Nixon signed the decree in 1973, and from that time the United States was not obliged anymore to deliver gold, to cover all of your debts abroad. In that time was more than the capability that they had to deliver in gold. Something happened. And what I'm trying to figure out in this book is from the 70s, we start in an era of unlimited leverage. And the inflection point, in my opinion, that that we are living today. And easy to see after the 2008 crisis that we start to see a very big leverage of all of the capital flow that was circling around and bits and bytes.
So just to clarify, the 1970s and the end of the gold standard led to a massive increase in leverage, and we've had that for about 40 years, and that era of leverage is coming to an end.
Yeah, today I was watching in the Bloomberg a program about the Facebook. The Facebook is the best example in terms of a company that reflects our era and disorder. Why? They were telling about the $100 billion of value of Facebook, how to see evaluation or to do evaluation of a company, that the three T's are the most important thing. And what are the three T's? Is talent, tool, and tomorrow. And what I'm trying to figure out is that after the improvement of the technology that let us make the flow and the capital flow circling limited in terms of bits and bytes in financial market, we create a world that in a millisecond you can make a lot of money. So in the volatility that was in the base of the modern era as well, because you see that if you are allowed to move around, and the base of this is a volatility. And today, this era, after the 70s especially, is focused in the short term. Is to make money in the short term. Who is dominant players of this era?
So what replaces that era of short-termism and leverage?
Sorry?
What replaces that era of short-term thinking and high leverage? If that's over, what's next?
Yeah, it's not over. I suppose that is a game that is not over. I suppose that we are reinvented the rules of the game. So I suppose that the word that we have to be in our mind, to have in our mind, is regulation. It's very clear. There are some people that don't like this word. But in my opinion, if you look around and see the financial system, for example, I'm from a bank, I worked for a bank 28 years. It's a Brazilian bank, a public bank, $600 billion assets, 23 countries, we are present in 23 countries, and we have the ratios in order. And if you compare Banco do Brasil with the other banks in India and Turkey and China, we're going to see that those banks has a very strong regulation. So I suppose that is the time that to see if you have, in fact, to impose the bill or the check or the cost for the mass, and who is going to be responsible to pay it or to pay for it.
Where does this leave trade here in the UAE and the Middle East? And you write about this in your book. And links between Brazil, one of the great emerging markets, the B in BRIC, specifically for those two countries that you have experience of.
For example, some Brazilian companies are being in UAE, especially companies that produce what UAE are looking for: food, iron ore, resources, because Brazilian exports are based on commodities. Brazil is the big food producer. Brazil is the biggest iron ore producer. And we are entering an era that we became, maybe in several years, one of the most big oil and gas producers as well. And like Russia and like other emerging countries. And I have some companies like Vale, that is the biggest iron ore producer, or bigger food, that when you go to the supermarket here and you buy your chicken, you see Sadia, and some people think that Sadia is from Saudi. No, Sadia is from Brazil. It's bigger food. It's one of the biggest food producers. So and what we're trying to do as a bank here, we are here for the last 3 years. We set up our representative office, trying to see how could you help the trade flow or improve or develop the trade flow between Brazil and UAE. And there are some basic products, some basic companies that are coming here to establish. So as a bank, what we're trying to do, the local banks and the other place is very kind to buy our risk, the risk of Banco do Brasil. And what we're trying to do is like a front bank, bring this company, Brazilian company, and use the risk of Banco do Brasil, trying to sell those companies here in the UAE. I much for that. This is one of our main focus in the region.
Well, listen, Carlos, we're out of time. We're going to have to leave it there, but it's been great talking to you. Carlos Machado, the head of Banco de Brazil here in the UAE. His latest book is titled The Rise of a New Order. If you want more details, Google Carlos Machado and The Rise of a New Order, and I'm sure you'll find it. But for now, Carlos, thanks very much indeed.
It is my pleasure. Thank you.
Tonight, with Richard Dean and Tim Elliott, in association with Samsung Galaxy S3, designed for humans, inspired by nature.